What's up, Gordon?
Hey, Joe.
How's things?
Good, good. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah,
Really
anytime.
appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. For the audience, Gordon and I, we have these like scheduled monthly chats, and I feel like each of these chats could have been a podcast. I figured let's just do a podcast.
Yeah.
So
Actually, Joe, I never told you. I actually really value our monthly chats. I feel like I made the
same.
short list because I know you're a busy guy.
Oh, you did. Yeah, you made the short list, and I feel the same way, right? I know you have a lot going on, and for you to schlep some time with me is that's awesome. So it's
Well, it's a small community, but at the same time, it's kind of a lonely community, right? We're all still working remotely, and it's difficult to find peers sometimes, especially when, our field is so wide. People can have so many different specialties. It's hard to find someone who could talk about the whole thing,
mhm.
and then really talk about at a higher level, right? Sort of like solutions and return on investment and why we actually do this. What's our raison d'etre, as they say, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of conversations. Uh, just a lot of ideas percolating in the industry right now. It's some we'll dig into it for a bit, but I guess for the audience first, if they don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Sure. So
Yeah.
I am Gordon Wong. I am a career data and analytics guy. My technical competency is really always been around databases. I started off as a DBA. I think in
Well,
SQL. I picture data models in my head as I walk down the street. It's just the way I
dang.
see the world. And then my entire career, I've pretty much fluctuated between being like a manager of some type, and driving solutions, or being an IC and getting my hands dirty. And I really enjoy that, and I think it actually gives me an interesting perspective because I've done that cycle many times.
hmm Yeah, you have. You're definitely a OG in this whole field here, but kind of backing up, right? I think there's some themes here. You've seen the data field, from I would say fairly early days to now. Like, what's instead of asking what's changed, I think we all kind of have ideas of what's changed. What stayed the same?
That's a great way of putting it. I think we're still amateurs.
Hmm.
I think we're still amateurs the way we do things. Our methodologies, our titles, our processes, how our teams work, how we start projects, how we deliver projects, how we measure value. I think we're amateurs across the board. And you just look at the state of something as simple as source code control.
Hmm.
I mean, how many SQL developers out there are still saving files to, onto their machine, or just leaving it in a tab in something like in the Snowflake's UI, right? Just having it save it as a tab, and just trusting that it's going to be there in the future. You know, how often do you get actual code review and feedback on the SQL you write? You know, and if you do get feedback, you're getting feedback on things like your syntax. How often do you get feedback on the actual result?
That's such a good point. Yeah.
Right. Um, I feel like the rest of the industry, or not the rest of the industry, but the software engineering overall is a lot more mature than us. And then, of course, you compare something like software engineering to manufacturing, which has a physical world and you get constant feedback. That's much more physical, and much more mature. We're just so abstracted, and we're so far away sometimes from the middle of the organization that I think we're still just sort of winging it.
So far away from the organization. That's really interesting. I haven't
Yeah,
really
that's something
heard
else
that
that's
perspective.
interesting, right?
Yeah. Describe that though. Like, what does that mean? Because I think it's interesting because I think we have sort of this data as the center of the universe, so to speak. But then we step outside of it and we realize like how far away we are from a lot of the business. I do agree with that observation, but walk me through that. Like, how did you arrive at this?
Well, I think it's just the observation of like having done so many projects, and the struggle of getting them conceived, to communicate them, to get them funded, to measure outcomes, and then really have some idea of like what difference did I make, right? And I think it has a lot to do with the way we brand ourselves and talk about ourselves. Like, someone might say, "Hey, I'm a SQL developer." Okay, what does that mean? You write SQL. Okay, cool. That's a useful skill. It's an activity though, more than a skill, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like now you say someone, I'm a finance analyst, and what I do is I help close the books every month. Okay, I have an idea what that person does and what they care about,
Hmm.
right? You tell me you're a SQL developer, but in what? What are you using your skills for? right? So I think we still are guilty, like so many technical people, of really talking about our technical skills and our activity as opposed to our purpose, right?
That's a
So
huge point. Maybe this is reflected too. When I look at how analysts or data scientists or even data engineers these days are have been taught, and I think this is changing finally, but historically it's been data science is about knowing pandas and Python and SQL, right? Like that's if you were to look on like LinkedIn, for example, or Twitter or something, and you ask people what a role would be, I would wager to guess more than half the answers would
mhm.
would come back with a description of the tool sets that people use.
Right. Right. I agree. I agree. And it's not to say that's not important, right? The tool set is really important because, because a lot of the tools are not that fungible yet, and or they're not that interchangeable, right? If you're using Databricks versus Snowflake, yes, and the concepts are the same. But if you sit me down in front of Snowflake, I'm pretty comfortable. You sit me down in front of Databricks, 30 years experience, I don't know where to start, right? I'd be like,
Hmm.
is there a SQL window somewhere? Where do I click, right? And so the tools do matter, but I still think we overemphasize them, and then we're identifying too much by that.
Yeah.
And let me use data science for example for a second, because we're repeating the same mistake here. You know,
Mm.
someone says, "Hey, you're a data scientist." I'm like, "Great, what do you do?" It's like I do linear algebra, right? Or I play.
Right.
But what do you do? What do you accomplish? Or maybe more interestingly, Joe, I'm sure you've had this conversation many times when someone has said to you, "Where should I put my data science group?" Right?
Mm.
Where in the company should I put my data science group? And somewhat challengingly, I'll ask you, well, where do you have your algebra group?
Yep.
Right? Where do you have your typing group? Right? Those things are activities, but we organize companies around function. So your data science team or your data scientists should be where they can make the most impact. Right? And so I think when we got the term analytics engineer, I think part of the reason why that term
Mm.
really took off is it got a little closer to the function. Well, what's the analytics engineer do? Oh, well, typically they transform data into knowledge and make it usable. Well, okay. And that's just a little closer to the business, right? But what does a data engineer do? You talk to a business person, they have no idea.
This is a foreign concept. Yep.
Right, right. Because they're so far away. Oh, I'm going to hit some API to create this event stream to dump this stuff into a staging area.
Hmm.
At what point did you sign a customer up? Right? At what
Right.
point did you run a marketing campaign? Right?
Yeah. It's like if you hired a carpenter,
Yes.
right? And they're like, yeah, I use like a Makita handsaw
Yeah.
and this brand of a tape measure here, and you just be like, what the fuck? Like,
Right. 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 I think that's a great example, right? A situation I think about a lot where, this goes a little bit broader. It's like a few years ago, about 10 years ago, we needed a new deck put on our house. We just bought our house. The old deck was falling apart, had no railings. It was like,
oh,
you just,
sweet.
yeah, you didn't even want to be on it, right? And I live in Somerville, Mass, very congested. We're very fortunate to have a small yard, but you want to maximize that square footage, right? So got a contractor to come in and give us a quote. And what this guy basically told us is like, I'm, I'm really good at building decks. I can build you the best deck in the world, right? And what
Mhm.
he wanted to do is cover my entire yard with a deck. It would
It's
have
really
looked like,
good.
right? It would have looked like, right? Right? Like, where am I gonna dock the boat? Pretty much. And so that didn't work, right? And then the next guy comes in and he says, almost word for word, right? He said, "I can do anything you want. Just tell me what you want. I can do anything." Okay.
Mm.
Well, okay, but that's still like I'm not an expert on decks, right? You want me to choose the wood, the nails, the paint, what right? So that didn't, So we talked to the third guy, and he started off with, "Tell me about you. What do you guys like to? What do you want to use your yard for? Do you have kids? Do
Mhm.
you like throwing parties? And then he figured out the function, the payoff of what the deck would lead.
Mm.
And it turns out what we needed was not a deck, but rather a patio, right? So instead of being elevated, but being flat, stone, whatever. And he walked us through how this would support our ability to grill and so on and so on. And it's not flammable. all this stuff. That guy got the job, right? He didn't tell me how good he was at driving nails. He helped me understand what my needs were, picture an outcome, and then design a solution to meet that outcome, right? And he taught me to be a better customer,
Mm.
right?
That's a good point.
Right? It was really important. He framed up the question. These are the questions you need to answer that I cannot answer for you. Like, do you like to throw parties? Right? He didn't ask me bullshit questions like, what kind of nails do you want to use? Right?
Right.
So I think about that a lot when I talk to my folks and lead teams and so on. Like, hey, when you're working with a stakeholder or a customer, you're trying to drive an outcome. So you need to know who your customers are, what they care about, and how you're doing right now, right? And the customer is never going to ask you to go. They may ask you, okay, they may ask you to review SQL, but they're not going to ask you to write Scala, right? They're not going to ask for it, right? You know,
That's really interesting. A question about that third carpenter, by the way. So when he asked you questions, um, were they framed in such a way that you ended up making the decision on your own, like, or how did he do that? I'm very curious.
yeah, he really explored our needs. Now,
Yeah.
to be frank, he was a better mason than he was a carpenter, so he was incentivized to lead me down the mason route.
Oh, okay.
But I've used him multiple times since and recommended him to neighbors and everyone. Everyone has like glowing reviews of this guy
Hmm.
who and he takes the time to listen, learn about you, figure out your budget, this kind of stuff, and consistently actually came in under budget, right? And how often do you hear that?
That's amazing. Oh, give me his number.
Yeah, he's awesome.
But that, it's interesting because I've had good carpenters and good. We did a remodel here a few years ago, and it was kind of hellacious, right? And you definitely
Yeah,
get some. I would say bozos in the mix, for sure. Like one guy ended up like ruining our furnace and kind of bailing. So that was expensive. And yeah, one of the other carpenters, I think he was, yeah, under budget all the time. Extremely honest. He was slow, but he would tell you, "Look, I mean, I got a lot of projects. I'm cheap because I'm going to come and do this when I have a chance." And thankfully, it's on stuff like a deck where it's not mission critical, so you can do it. But we've since referred him to other people. But and he did a lot of maintenance around our house too, and a lot of repairs. And it was like, yeah, you don't need to replace anything. I'll just patch it up for you. I'm like, okay, if it works, it works. So, but it's interesting, right? Because he was always focused on the results. It wasn't, I'm gonna use these tools to do this job and whatnot. And he was just really honest. And um, I think it always exceeded expectations. And I think to draw it back to data, like that's to me that's where you start winning, is if you can start overvaluing, delivering more value and less time. People like that. It's sort of the immutables, right? I mean, people
right.
just want quality and cheaper and quicker than they thought. So,
Yeah, I have
yeah.
I have a bit of a blue collar background. I was lucky enough to work
Oh,
for
nice.
yeah, I worked for my friend's dad as a roofer in college, and
Boy,
I've
that's
been a
hard
caterer.
work.
It was great, but like it goes back to things like if people say, hey, people ask me like, what's the most valuable thing you've ever learned in any of your jobs, and I'll say, how to pack a truck, right?
Yeah.
Right, and you picture, okay, 6:30 in the morning, January, winter break, right, New Jersey, so it's going to be like 5 degrees and dark, and you need to pack the truck for the day. What do you need to do in order to pack the truck? Right? I mean, of course, you need the truck, you need to know where the supplies are, but you also might need to know who's on the crew today.
Hmm.
What's the job? Is it a shingle job? Okay. How big is the house? Then that tells you how big of a ladder you need.
Hmm.
Or is it an industrial job? Oh, we're doing tar today. Oh, okay, I need a heater and this and that and stuff like that. So the reason why packing a truck became such a valuable skill is like you need to understand the outcomes for the day and the plan for the day,
Hmm.
right? And what the crew was. And if you didn't get these things right, the whole day was ruined, right? You drive an hour to a job site and you have the wrong ladder, your day is ruined, right? Right. And I've brought that thinking, and the same thing for catering. You got to bring the chairs, the table,
Oh,
the
yeah.
dishes, all that stuff, right? There's no extra time in catering, and so I brought the same kind of thinking though to daily stand-ups, right?
Mm.
Hey, what's the goal for today? Right? What's our plan for getting there? And what kind of blockers do you anticipate? I always ask those three questions, right? And the blockers is a little bit like this follow-up question: who can help, right? And I don't worry about trying to do a week, a month, or a year in terms of roadmap or planning until we can get the day done. If you can't execute for a day, why try to
Right.
plan for a week, right? Um, and I've seen it over and over again. I think at Fitbit, um, getting the daily stand up nailed, I think gave us 40% yield bonus compared to,
Interesting.
right? So I was like, on a team of 10, it was 4 more engineers for free with better morale, a better sense of self worth, right? Better relationship with customers, all this stuff. I mean, it was just totally, and then, yeah, this is a basic thing. Just get your day right. Pack your truck, right? And,
What changed? I mean, walk me through that process because that's a pretty remarkable outcome.
I think a lot of it was understanding the challenges of working as a disparate team, right? The challenges of nailing down requirements and understanding outcomes, the challenges around focus, So it did help that, we waffled PT. I won't say it was super smooth. It took a couple
Of
months,
course, it won't be. Yeah.
right? But we waffled PT Kanban and Scrum. We split the teams a couple different ways by skill set and also by business units. We tried a whole bunch of different things. And a lot of it was just really understanding, making this realization that having a bunch of different people work together is hard, right? So, and what are the things that make it hard? Well, one of the number one things is just communication, right? So you could spend 2 hours talking on your daily stand up. That's a way of communicating, but that's a huge amount of overhead, right? You've already burned up everyone's attention resources. They're not going to have much left. So being aware that communication is both valuable and expensive led me down the route that, like, oh yeah, I want to maximize the ROI of our communication, right? Getting everyone to drop what they're doing, come together, pay attention for 10, 15 minutes, be open and creative and so on is actually not for free. You know, Part of the reason I wanted my stand-ups to be 15 minutes is because they're actually, because a 45-minute stand-up was just exhausting, you know. Whereas you can come up with 15-minute stand-up sort of like fired up, ready to go. And so there's a lot of like these things, so and I did a lot of like tweaking the board and reminding everyone, hey, let's pull the board up and let's make sure you update your tickets and so on, and being forgiving about it too. Like, just remember, when you update your ticket, you're actually doing other people a favor, right?
Mm.
You're unblocking your team. You're not doing it for me. I'm not even doing the work for the most part in those cases, right? But you're unblocking your team, right? And then when you tailor all the activities in your team around unblocking your teammates, friction gets remarkably low, right? There's other examples like always do code reviews before you write new code, right? If someone's waiting for you to do a code review, that's the most important thing you can do. You're unblocking somebody else, and consider what that person is asking you to do. They're saying, "Please help me improve my work."
Mm.
That's a very vulnerable thing to do, but incredibly critical. And so I think it should be responded to in the same tone, with generosity and coaching and patience, right? It's not an opportunity to criticize. It's definitely not an opportunity to say, hey, I don't like the way you did the spacing here, you know,
Hmm.
right? Um,
But how do you coach? I would say roles that are notoriously pedantic and fickle, and I would say solo to a large degree. Like, how
yeah.
do you coach non-pedantic and team-oriented behavior?
Yeah, it's not easy. And then of course there's circles here. So, right, because we started off talking about why data projects fail and what has to stay
Yeah.
the same. And a lot of it is lack of empathy with the stakeholder in there.
Mm.
So part of the reason why if you want to have empathy for the stakeholder and be tied to outcomes, you need to have empathy for your teammates too, and for yourself. So I think a lot of it, again, there's no magic solution here, but a lot of it's patience, it's empathy, it's modeling, it's checking your own behavior. So hey, how often, frequently you get picked to lead a data team or a technical team of some kind because of your strong technical skills,
Yeah.
right? But as a manager, yes, you're still expected to contribute technically, and let's not have too much false modesty there, right? But that's not your primary outcome anymore,
Right.
right? You got 5 people working for you, you got 10 people working for you. If they're 50% utilized, you just lost half the team. Doesn't matter. You better be 5x more productive than anyone else if you're going to make up for that, right?
Hmm.
So it's just a matter of practicality. So if you're gonna get a good ROI of this team, if you're gonna live up to the trust the organization has put in you, then you need to be thinking about how do I get this group to move together, you know, and but also be concede that 10 people are probably not 10 times as productive as one person, right? So study this, figure out what's a reasonable outcome and what are the blockers there. Theory of constraints, right? Theory of limits here. What's holding us back? It's like, oh, hey, we're spending a lot of time communicating. How do we make communication smoother? How do I get people to share and so on? Help. Well, I think working on their empathy, and this is why we have things like retros. We're like, hey, it's like, so here's a great opportunity for you. You're awesome at Python. You've got lots of skills here. So and so is just getting started. You know, I think it'd be great for the team and the project if you could, help them improve their work, right? Do you have any experience coaching other people? Do you know how to do a PR, a code review? Okay, here's a great article I read on it, you know, and here, or we could talk, we could walk through one together. Let's do it, right? Let's learn together. And so, but trying to boil it down to this like simple things again, that unblocking someone else is almost always more profitable than unblocking yourself,
Mm.
right? Almost always, right? It doesn't feel that way, You think because your name's attached to the story. So then you as a manager and also the team, you need to create a safe environment where people can feel comfortable helping others before doing their own thing,
That's key.
right? Which means you own outcomes together, right? I mean, what would you say if you were on a sprint team and this manager said, "Hey, we've lined up 10 stories in the sprint, and so on and so on. And at the end of the sprint, during retro, we're going to count up all the story points and see who did the most." Right. And the person who did the most is going to get a box of chocolates, and the person who's going to did the least, well, we're going to have a conversation.
Oh, I've seen this.
Yeah. Is
Yeah.
that a healthy team?
Oh, absolutely not.
Right.
This particular team I'm thinking of, I think it's like 100% turnover each year.
Right. Yeah, I don't want to be on that team.
Nobody does. No.
And it's not that you don't. It's not that not holding people accountable, but like if you start with only holding individuals accountable for the individual effort, you will never achieve your team outcomes, right? Your team objectives. You know, if you're just gonna measure people individually like that, and not give them credit for helping other people and so on and so on, then just put up a job board and say, hey, everyone, just take your stories or whatever, and I'll pay you per story, right? But I don't want to work there.
How do you hold a team accountable?
Yeah, I think and I run the risk of sounding too like almost like this is a fairy tale, but I think I've seen it over and over again. I think mostly the best way to hold a team accountable is for the team to hold itself accountable,
Mm.
right? And a team's not going to hold itself accountable unless they feel safe to have that internal conversation, which comes from things like retros and building a safe environment. And they're not going to care about accountability unless they care about outcomes. Right. So that's why I'm always going to try to tie it back to like, how do we make a difference and what's the purpose of the company? Right. How do we measure what is customer value here? Right. And how do we make a difference there? So for instance, like I've worked at healthcare companies, right? And so, hey, our outcome is to help people on Medicaid have better. Our goal is to help people on Medicaid have better outcomes, and then you get to know these people. Frequently, the patients of a accountable care organization who are on Medicaid may never have received any good healthcare their entire lives. Right, and that's kind of alien to people like us, right? Who've probably I could go see a doctor whenever I want. All right. But they think that they've never gotten any decent healthcare or respect from anyone in that position.
Mm.
It's pretty humbling. And then so I can get behind that mission. I'm like, wow, we are helping people have better health outcomes, to see a doctor for the first time, to help their kids get to a dentist. Great. That's awesome. Now, how do I contribute to that? Oh, maybe I'm tied into the market organizations. So we're finding people who would benefit from our service. Or I'm in product analytics. Okay, we're measuring, who's getting what services and so on, and figuring out who else could get services. Or finance, you're helping create good contracts so that we can be sustainable and grow. Now I'm tying into the data side of it, but if I, have these outcomes, it's like, okay, in order for finance to close the books so that we could be financially healthy, so that we can get funding and all this stuff, we need to do this claims processing and we need to have it done by the fifth. Okay. That's something I can care about, right? And I can see that I make a difference, right? And this is the same lessons all through life, right?
Yeah.
If you don't think you can make a difference, why do you try,
Hmm.
right? And so, and then, we're both parents, right? We try to help our kids understand what their agency is in the world, right? Partly so they can make a difference, and partly because their lives will just be better,
Yeah.
right? Right. So when you help your team understand its purpose, you are going to improve the quality of life for your team, and that's when you start getting to accountability.
That's such a good point. It's super, I would say, underrated too, because I think in a lot of cases, kind of back to your comment about individual contributors becoming managers, people aren't necessarily trained to become managers, right?
No,
And when you do, it's seen as this quote next step in career progression. Um, and if you're not taught management, I think or even if you are, let's say, for argument's sake, we'll say that you aren't. I mean, all too often, what I see is, the manager wants to take the credit. The manager wants to. It becomes a self-serving thing. Like how's the team going to help my career go
yeah,
forward? Right. I think the majority of times that's what happens, and so it's definitely I would say a sign of maturity to take more of the approach you're taking. And part of I think it helps to have a bad manager in your life, so you kind of understand what not to do.
sure.
Um, but
No disrespect to any manager I've ever had, but yeah, there's lessons to be had there, right?
for sure.
I think that this again, it goes back to a lot of this, like having some modesty and recognition that um, you can't always just be a superstar right away, right? And you're not going to be
Hmm.
the center of attention, and then the things are really stacked against you. Like you think about the situation of a new manager, as you just pointed out, right? They're not trained. They don't necessarily have training. They are used to succeeding in a certain way, and you're going to take that away from them, right? They don't get the code anymore. They don't get to do whatever they're doing. So that whole dopamine hit, that even of addiction, is now they're now in withdrawal, right? So they got to find some other way to get their sense of self, to stimulate that sort of stimulation and self worth and so on. And as a manager, your payback is frequently deferred, right? It's like the famous experiments of kids who get an Oreo now or two Oreos later, right?
Mm,
It takes maturity and time frame to be able to look forward in the future, and we frequently do not create safe environments for new managers.
mm,
You
that's so
know,
true.
right? So and then we set them up. It's like, we're super impressed by your work. We think you're going to be a future organization. All this stuff. Here you go. No pressure, but here's a team, and continue being a superstar,
Yeah,
right?
it's like handing people children to raise or something. So it's a lot like parenting in some ways, though, right? I mean, there are definitely books on raising kids.
Yep.
I think it's just one of those things where you just have to go do it to really figure it out. It's in a lot of ways, I think it's very similar because with management, it you're going to make every mistake in the book, especially as a new manager. It's just I think that's more of the expectation. If you run it perfectly out of the gate, I don't know that's you probably just got lucky in a lot of cases. It's when sometimes it's the team that you inherit and build, and sometimes it's you, and sometimes it's a combination of the two. But you know,
Right.
and I've seen some teams too where I'm just like, yeah, fire the whole lot immediately. Like nothing is going to save this situation at all.
No, spare them for this, right?
Mhm.
Totally do. And maybe the people are good, but they're just like this team does not work,
Oh yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And so and then so what be mature. What are your options here, right? What can we do with what we have? Yeah, and then let's not mix up success with being good, right? So
Mhm.
I think we've both seen how some of the large organizations out there that have been very successful in the last 20 years. I'm really unimpressed by the managers I see coming out of it.
Mm.
Like, oh, I thought you would know something, right? But then maybe they lack the learning opportunities. When
Mm.
you're like a lot of companies are. think of them as a boat where they're being driven by one. They have like 10 engines, but only one of them really works. But that one engine, whether it be like, their initial business model just happens to make up for the fact that the other 9 engines aren't really working,
Right.
right? And I don't want to be too cynical about it, but let's not underestimate how often that happens, right?
Oh, it's very common. Yep.
And so you want to get good at something, you need to struggle at it, right?
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point, though. I've seen managers from these bigger tech companies, so to speak, and some are great, but some I think there's almost like a certain archetype of manager and employee that come out of these places, and there's because there's a type of a culture there. Each
Right.
of these companies is different. Some are, maybe nicer than others. Some are just notorious for being very brutal. That's the reality of it. And I'm not going to say it's right or wrong. It works for what that company's trying to do. And so it is what it is. Right. But when they try and go to other organizations, what I typically see is they'll take a lot of um, that persona with them, which can work in some cases and not work. Right. So
Right.
in the cases, I think of the more aggressive type companies, it's typically not going to work. You're going to be an asshole, and
Yeah.
people aren't going to like you. That's
Yeah.
how it is.
And this goes back to the lack of maturity in our organization, right? We struggle with recognizing skills and learnable skills, right? And I'll make it two comparisons to like sports. You and I are both rock climbers, right? So we both climb, and I'm these days I'm a V3 V4 bouldering, in terms of bouldering. But if I had to pick an instructor, right, just based on like a one page description and their picture or something like that, am I going to pick the guy who is like 6'4" with really long arms and is 23 years old and climbing V10s? Or am I going to pick the guy who is 5 years older than me, still climbing V4s and is
Mm,
4 foot and 5'6"? You know, right? The guy who's like 6'5" has nothing to teach me. I mean, not that nothing, but he can't teach me to be taller, right?
right.
Right? I want the person who has struggled similar to me and overcome those things. And just like my older daughter was a soccer camp yesterday, and there's a woman there who was currently injured, but she's on. If she wasn't injured, she'd be on the extended roster for the Women's World Cup, right?
Dang.
And she's young, and she's like 5'11". My daughter's 5'6", and the other girls are asking her like, "Well, how did you get recruited? How did you get where you are?" And she's like, "He goes, frankly, I'm the wrong person to ask. I've been really lucky in my life. I've never had to do a tryout ever. You know,
Mm,
she was just fantastic, and people went and picked her. Right? She's the wrong person to ask. Right? To on how to get. What's your strategy for getting recruited by a college team? Right? Because she didn't overcome the things you have to overcome. You know.
yeah, it's interesting. I'm going through something similar with my youngest kid right now. He's so Salt Lake City is sort of the epicenter of rock climbing and one of the epicenters in the world. But every good climber lives here at this point, especially if
Yeah.
you compete. Like the U.S. team trains here. And so they had like youth nationals here over the weekend, and so that was kind of cool to watch and whatnot. But you see a lot of these kids and they're working their asses off. My youngest kid, he's about 10. He's like, okay, so I'm he's been wanting to compete for a while, and eventually I think wants to go to the U.S. team. But like, okay, so what team do you want to be on? You know, and we finally settled on a gym, but the gym, it's not too far from my house, like a 5 minute drive or something. It's got like I think like half the kids who made it to the finals are on this team, right? So it's like, and the coaches have all competed at the World Cup and so forth. So at this point, I'm like, okay, so you're probably gonna want these coaches because they've been through it, right? They
Right.
know what's going on. Um, versus the team I think you wanted to be on. I mean, it's a good team, but it's like it just doesn't have the experience level, the depth that this other team does. I think that's what makes a difference. I mean, the one of the kids on the team ended up getting silver at the Olympics.
Mm.
So that's just a difference, right? But it does come down to having gone through those hard knocks too. It's the same as managers. I respect the manager. I think who's made some screw ups in the past, but is at least not afraid to admit them and understand what went wrong because we
For
all
sure.
have been there. I mean, I've done things that I would definitely look back on like that. Just kind of a jackass. It's fine. Um, you know, my oldest kid, I haven't watched The Office right now because I'm like, if you just watch, dude, it's a Michael Scott school of leadership, right? So if you
Right.
just do everything the exact opposite of what he's doing, you probably have a pretty good career. So,
Well, we just finished the first season of Secession, which I resisted watching for a while because
mm,
I didn't really want to watch rich people misbehaving. But my wife finally convinced me to watch it. It's been pretty enjoyable, and it does strike me as like it's so much like watching The Office. It's farcical at times. But the other thing is that for people who don't know what the show is, it's a show on HBO, but there's a very wealthy family, and there's a struggle to see who's going to succeed in the family business. And all the kids are kind of, and I've only watched season one, and all the kids are kind of screw ups for the most part.
mm.
But if you are fair to them, you realize it's not really their fault. They haven't been in a situation where they can test themselves and fail. Their father is not someone who lets them fail with any kind of safety, right? They're not learning from their mistakes, and right? They in some ways, everything's stacked against them in that regard. Now, they're not good people for the most part, from what I can tell. But I do have sympathy for them being expected to perform at a level that they just don't have the experience to do so at. You know.
Good show, worth
Yeah,
watching.
yeah,
Okay,
it's a good show. The acting's fantastic. Again, it's not going to leave you feeling good about the world after watching an episode. And there's sometimes I just want to watch something like The Good Place, right?
okay. Haven't watched that either, actually. Interesting. Well, I'll add that to my list. So I don't watch a lot of shows. It's the weirdest. I don't know. It's the weirdest thing.
You're busy,
Uh,
yeah, me too. So it's something like it's just something you do. I do in the evenings. I do my PT, right? And then like the leg lifts and all that stuff, right? Keep those hips working.
you do what you got to do, man. So,
There's maintenance.
oh yeah,
I want to use that as a segue a little bit too, because I'm going to
yeah.
talk about this is a part again about being mature and being a professional. So when you deliver a knowledge product, whether it be a reporting solution, dashboards, a model, or something like that, at what point does a stakeholder or customer start deriving value?
Hmm. It's a good question.
Right. It's not meant
Not
to be a trick
not always
question,
not always immediate.
right? Yeah.
Yeah,
No. Yeah. In fact, probably over an extended period of time, right?
yeah.
I'm leaving the witness a little bit, but over an extended period of time. And so if you were to picture the curve of accumulated value from a knowledge product,
Hmm.
it kind of looks like this, right? Slow, it's long and slow at first, and and people have to learn how to use it, and you got to evolve it a little bit, and it's going to take some time. It may take years, right? How long does it take to get positive ROI back from a data warehouse? But compare that to our expectations. When do people think they're going to get all the value?
Right now,
Yeah,
yesterday actually.
right. You know, but right now, if I deliver you a reporting solution, you essentially have derived no value, and we've incurred a whole bunch of development costs. So the development costs or the cost of the solution look more like this, right? The cumulative. It's like it starts up high, it goes up fast, and then it kind of goes up slowly over time with maintenance and what have you. But if you look at that value over time and look at the maintenance costs, and you just consider that sort of cash flow,
Hmm.
uh, that maintenance is giving you the most amount of value from that period of time. Meaning, like, hey, so the warehouse is down, this pipeline died, or whatever, so on and so on. And that person, someone who fixes something before breakfast, and then now it's ready for business when people start working, right? There's a huge amount of ROI in that bit of maintenance, right? But we give it no respect. We give that work to like the lowest ranked person in the team. We might outsource it to another country where people don't even have any context.
Hmm.
And yet, in some ways, on an ongoing basis, it is the most valuable thing you can do. Let's go back to unblocking others, right? When you unblock others, this might be the most valuable thing you can do in the course of your day. Keeping the solution working, unblocking
Yeah.
users, right, might be the most valuable thing to do. So what I want to say, I'm going with this is that when we think about not just the total cost of ownership, but the ROI of an existing solution, we should be thinking about the timeframes when we're getting it back. We should think about where the costs are accumulated, right? And we should be factoring in. Let's not treat maintenance as something unfortunate that we have to do. It's an opportunity to drive value, right? So I believe really strongly in building good support channels, right? Good documentation. When you have someone who's on rotation or on call as an engineer, they're the most important person on the team. right? Right? If they need help from the rest, if they need help, the rest of the team should be drop whatever they're doing and go help that person.
How do you communicate these expectations with stakeholders?
Oh well, stakeholders. Well, I mean, part of it is like convincing them to trust you, right? And so that
Mm,
goes back to empathy and trying to help them understand that you are on the same team, and that you care about their outcomes, right? And that if they fail, you fail, right? If I'm building a marketing solution and the marketing team can't run profitable campaigns, I am failing. So I need them, right? That's the contract. You bring me good quality problems, I will give you good quality solutions, right? And that's the contract. Um, but of course, it takes time, right?
hmm
So let's you know concede that, hey, I'm not, I might be an expert in my technologies, I might build marketing solutions before, but I may not have worked with you before. So how do we, where are you in pain? Where are you struggling? What kind of short-term project can we do that gives you some immediate relief and also helps
mm,
to know each other, right? Ask them how they want to work together, how they want to be communicated to, what's going to make them look good with their boss, right? What's going to help them sleep at night, right? You got to care about these things. I went and I was struggling with my hips a few years ago, and I ended up seeing three different surgeons who all wanted to do a hip replacement. Turns out I didn't need a hip replacement, right?
Oh, thank God.
Right. I started doing yoga and going to the gym, and 90% of my pain went away, right? But one of these guys walked into the room. He's like looking down at like an MRI in his hand, right? And he just says, "Oh yeah, we need to replace this hip." He didn't even ask me my name. He never established any trust. There was no way in the world I was ever going to let this guy touch me, right? And that's the same thing. You're an engineer, you're a SQL developer, you're going into talking to a stakeholder, and you're
Yeah.
paying more attention to technology, and you're not caring about them. They're never going to trust you, nor should they, right?
Right. Especially if you come in and say, "Oh yeah, that you need Snowflake for that."
Right, right, right.
End of story.
You want your stakeholders to be part of the process. You want them to trust you. You got to care about them.
Yeah. Who was it? Chris Voss, I think, in Never Split the Difference, he talks about, it's a book on hostage negotiation. I don't know if you ever read it.
Mm,
Very good book.
okay.
One of the things he always says is when you're negotiating, and again, this guy negotiated hostages. It's not like there's a
Yeah.
win-win situation here. It's like you don't get half of a hostage back. Um,
Mhm.
his whole thing is first, like, forget about win-win. It's not how this works, right? But you got to understand what does this person want, and then you got to make it their idea,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So you always ask open-ended questions. So they can fill in the answers, right? And I think a lot of it is the same way. Where to develop trust, the person has to feel like you're guiding them down a path that was their idea to begin with. If you come to a stakeholder and say, "Yeah, this is what you need to do," hip replacement, check the checklist, Gordon, whatever your name is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's now you're just being like, I would say, ignorantly prescriptive about things. So, and you
Right.
think of what would happen if you had to get the hip replacement for no earthly reason, right? I mean, you're climbing right now, which would indicate you're, you know,
Yeah. Listen,
you're
5 years ago,
fine.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but I think it's interesting because it's just, you're absolutely right. You have to build that trust, but a lot of cases, trust comes from a position of somebody telling themselves they trust you, right? That's a narrative. Like, I trust Gordon for these reasons, but it's not
Yeah.
like you had to, it's not like you like beat those reasons into my head, or beat me into submission and said, "Now you trust me." It's like, yeah, totally. It doesn't work that way,
Yeah.
right? But this is what I think a lot of people don't realize. And I make mistakes in this all the time too. I think everyone does, but it's like, it has to come from a place where that person decides that they're going to do it. That they're going to take a chance on you, and especially when you're new, they got a thing in companies is everyone has a lot of time that's very limited and a lot of resources, and more important, a lot of like social and political capital. And like, why am I going to waste it on you? With this new project, I don't know you. This is a risk.
Right. Right.
So
Right. And empirical trust is different from just straight up sort of unfounded emotional trust, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, trust is still always emotional, right? But so you can't get to empirical trust until you have some history.
Yeah.
So you just need to set up a rational situation where the person realizes that your motives and your outcomes are aligned. I took over a team that was in distress 2 years ago. And it was a remote work situation where the team was in Europe and I was in Boston, right? So 6 hours time difference, 30 people all over, scattered all over Europe. And one of the realizations I made first, and then I told the team right away, was that I didn't have any power,
Mm.
right? I told, because I was a contractor, I was, and this contract was such that like, I had made it clear that I'm not going to be the hatchet guy. I'm not here to do layoffs. I'm here to turn this team around, right? And so I realized myself, and then I shared with the team that I had no power. I'm a contractor. I'm on a month by month deal. You're 6 hours away. I can't see you. I can't look over your shoulder. If you don't like me, here's what you do. Just ignore me, right?
Mm.
Give me some platitudes in Slack. Respond to my email in 2 or 3 days, and I'll be gone in a month because I'll have failed,
Right.
right? So first of all, I told the team that I have no power. They had the power. Then secondly, I asked, talked about like, but I think we are here because of this outcome that we desire. And here's my experience. And here's some ways I've made a difference in the past. And so then I'm going to ask you, given what I've tried to share, can you trust me for a month? Right. And see, and if things are a little bit better, can you trust me for another month? And I wrote them a letter. This sounds really corny right now. I get a little cringe when I think about it. I really call it permission to lead. And I put this out on paper and said, hey, this is what I'm asking, right? But the situation you're in right now is not a great one. What do you have to lose if you give me some of your time and focus, right? And long story short, fast forwarding, I'm super proud that year I spent a year with them. I always told them they should be hiring someone full time in their time zone,
Right.
but I am super, super happy with the way that came out, satisfied. I think a huge number, like over half the people on the team out of 30 went through some kind of career transformation. People have moved on to
Right.
like better roles. They are a whole bunch of people like I can go, we're just like, we're friends now. Right. And I still get asked to provide mentorship. So
That speaks volumes.
it was amazing for me, but I am not trying to sound like a saint. I am saying that by fostering a environment of sharing and common purpose and putting other people first can be a deeply selfish thing because the outcomes can be great, right? I feel really good about that situation, you know, and so like there are selfish reasons, or maybe there's personal reasons to try to foster an
Mm.
environment, a workflow, style, a culture of trust and sharing.
That's super huge. And then I guess these people that you had in your team, they went on to do other stuff. You still mentor them? Are they carrying on the philosophy of Saint Gordon?
Well, see, right, yeah, yeah. I think
That's
so.
cool.
I think, and then, and it was difficult at times, right? It's like 3 months into this gig, the COO said to me that, hey, I think you're kind of a softie, you know,
Mm.
and I think you should be cracking the whip more, right? The team needs to be going faster. And I said, I think maybe I've done a poor job communicating our progress so far. Let's review that. But also, I'm going to ask you, like, be a little bit more patient, right? You handed me a team in distress. You fired the previous guy. No one gets fired in Germany, right? You fired the previous
Oh, yeah. Okay.
and his two right hand men, right? And then this is COVID and all this stuff. You got to have some realistic expectations. And I said, and if you're not willing to wait a little longer, then I'm the wrong guy because this is the solution I have, right? But so you know, he waited, and then another 3 months went by, and so 6 months into this gig, and he came to me and said, "You were absolutely right. Data is everywhere." You know, and people here in this podcast who are on the team will recognize that term, right? But
Yeah.
but it paid off, right? It paid off, and we were exceeding all our goals, right? But I admit I had a crisis of faith too. When he said that to me, I was kind of like, maybe I do need to crack the whip more. Maybe I'm not being directive enough, it's, but I had done, like, I had notes on every person. I had notes, from every one-on-one, talked about their, try to understand their motivation, what their constraints are, what their blockers were, and so on and so on. And going back through my own thinking, I was like, I think this is the right course.
Well, and if you crack the whip, it's just going to erode any trust that the team's built for
Yeah.
you, right? It's like it's all gone. I got
Yes.
to start over.
Yes.
So
Right. Yeah, and I firmly believe that you want to erode trust in your team. Start handing out punishments,
yeah, I mean, there's a
right?
time and place for it for sure. But it's
Yes,
if there's like a colossal screw up where it's like and it was a malicious, for example, then people who know me, I have no problem cracking whips. That's the easy part for me. Being a nice guy is actually hard for me. So, cause cracking that's the easy thing to do. I just need to be a dick, and I crack the whip, and then problem solved for now. But then the punch pass of the trust that we built up that goes away.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
Well,
to the point where it goes away.
it's your payoff. It's your payback window, right?
Yeah,
So, like, if the house is on fire, you probably don't have time to just gently sit down with people and say, "Hey, this is how you properly carry a bucket." You're like, "Hey, grab the freaking bucket. Let's go!" Right?
yeah, yeah. It needs to get out. I'll give you an example, right? So I remember I was contracting with one company, and they wanted to do a cloud migration, but the existing team that was in charge of all the on-prem data systems, they didn't want to go to the cloud, and they're actively undermining the the executive that brought me in, and to the point where they're trying to get him fired and trying to torpedo this project, and so the decision was made. Okay, so these guys, I think, bless their souls, but they're all gone. I had to
Yeah,
fire every single one of them, and that's what happened. It was such a toxic environment. I was just like, I don't know how else you're going to solve this. These guys will never have your back ever. They're
right.
actively undermining everything that you were brought in to do, and at the end of the day, they're just kind of a bunch of a-holes anyway. So I don't know. I do not feel bad about the situation.
And sometimes you're headed that situation, and then you again, you need to help
It is what it
understand the
is.
history, right? You got to be
Yep.
honest. Yeah. Um, and then wow, Joe, an hour went by super fast, and I got to run to my
Yeah. No
next.
worries. Yeah. No worries. But yeah, it's great talking with you. So typical chat of ours. We keep talking for
Typical
hours
Joe,
and over
right?
time here. But yeah, awesome. Well, thanks, Gordon. We'll
All right, I hope to do
talk
it
to you
again.
soon. Yeah.
All
Okay.
right,
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.
cheers, bye bye.
Take care.